So no, obviously I feel very much affinity between the kind of the work that I've been doing in the past years and what I understand for Marco that the institution here is undertaking, and I think it's these are part of a kind of perhaps a shift that existed both in the humanities and in architecture that allowed them to kind of to meet on a common ground of architectural research. So I think our joint question, and I'm definitely as well referring to Ines's lecture before, is how to read politics through its conflicts via the built environment. In what way the built environment indexes certain political forces, conflicting political forces. And I think that there is a notion that we need to a little bit go beyond in order to understand with a little bit more subtlety the way in which politics and architecture relate to each other. And that is to say, at least in my case, what I had to go beyond, and perhaps that's one of the reasons it's taken me so many years, is the kind of one-to-one relation between them. A kind of understanding that is much too simplified that architecture is an embodiment of ideology, simply an embodiment of ideology. Obviously, state ideology and its representation goes into it, but in fact what I would like to show today through various examples is the fact in which space is being produced and reproduced not through a kind of a top-down imposition of an ideology on the ground, a sort of rational organization of the terrain, such as, the classical accounts of colonialism, that in fact, even as we inherit them from certain Foucauldian reading, that there's a kind of a certain rationalization of space, its organization in a sort of an efficient manner that both produce a kind of a machinic understanding of space and a kind of one-to-one representation of power. So I think that in a kind of contemporary frontier condition that I'm investigating, where the multiplicity of players is so much more extended. So we cannot no longer kind of speak of simply the Zionist state, Israel, as imposing its will on the landscape, but a field in which we have now the state, we have internationals, we have the media, we have NGOs, we have various forms of Palestinian resistance and Palestinian politics that interact in an increasingly complex manner with kind of the technologies of control that are imposed in order to subjugate them. And I think that we need to start reading space as the sum result of these conflicts, of these frictions, rather than a translation of politics, simply a translation of politics into space. So this is something that I'd like to kind of to open up, and perhaps to open it up through a very specific example. In fact, it is the story that starts my book, HoloLand. I think it is rather paradigmatic of that. Of whatever you see here, that is a map, perhaps just in the form of introduction. I started this research in 2002 with this map that I've produced for a human rights organization. In fact, my first commission was to see whether in an extended field of resistance that exists both internationally as within Israel, we can introduce the discourse of architecture into a form of political resistance. So my task from this human rights organization was to see whether we could, in fact, criminalize architecture, see whether lines on maps, whether the work of architects and planners, in fact, operated in breach of human rights, which are in fact international regulations and international law, right? So we're talking about the initial brief that I had was to see not whether by accepting a commission and building in occupied area, obviously in contravention of international law, but whether there is a crime in the line, whether in the way in which homes are laid out, windows are organized, a road is bent, there is a criminal intent, that we can actually read it from the plans themselves. In order to do that, In fact, we had to produce the tools to do that, and that is this map that you see here. I mean, this map, in fact, was the first at the time. Now there are many more, simply because as well we put that map as kind of available vectorially on the net, so that other organizations could reproduce it and extend it, etc. But this map reproduced for the first time the formal dimension of the occupation, right? If beforehand we had settlement marked as points along the landscape, now we started seeing the form. We could see the form, we can understand, we can read the form as a kind of participator, as an agent within that ecology. So, because you don't know the area so well, I suppose, this is the West Bank. This is the area that Israel, one of the areas that Israel occupied in 1967. This is in fact the coastal plain where most Israeli cities are. This is the Tel Aviv metropolitan region. This is Jerusalem. As you know, Jerusalem is half occupied, half within Israel, internationally recognized Israel, although controversial as well. Everything that you see within that more colorful area is in blue are the Jewish settlements and areas under their control. So the lighter blue are area under their jurisdiction, an area under planning. And what you see in the spectrum of browns is Palestinian-built fabric and area under Palestinian control, right? So it's both a map of physical boundaries and structure and juridical. It's the space of the law, in fact, right? And as you see, it's an incredibly complex and fragmented space. So why should such a fragmented space be created, even if it is a kind of simply an attempt to kind of rationalize the landscape? So what you see marked here in a red square is an area north of Jerusalem, in fact between Jerusalem and Ramallah. And as you see here, there is a bend in the road, right? I will mark it here with my cursor. This bend in the road. Bends in the road are usually occurring when there is a mountain, as you know, a hilltop. You go around it. Now, when there is a hilltop, usually it's as well a strategic area. And in fact, settlers, Israeli settlers, not the government, but independent right-wing organization, wanted to take control of this hilltop for a long time and needed to get various excuses to bypass the Israeli government sort of promise, both to the Palestinians and to the Americans, that it will no longer build any settlements. This was in the 90s during the Oslo Accord. So settlers actually had to resort to quite sophisticated kind of tricks, let's say. So what they were saying, which was actually true, is as they were driving round the bend in this road, they were losing receptions on a mobile phone for about 20 seconds, right? I mean, obviously, a mountain blocks electromagnetic radiation. And they were saying that those 20 seconds is exactly the time and space by which they could be attacked without being able to call for help, i.e., there is a security concern about this particular bend in the road and hilltop. So they've appealed the hilltop was belonging to two Palestinian farmers from the nearby villages, and even according to the rules of occupation, it is difficult to gain access to private land. But for security concern, this is possible. So the military gave a security permission to build a mobile phone antenna on that particular hilltop to cover those 20 seconds of black shadow, reception shadow within it. When you put an antenna on a hilltop, you need to, in fact, connect it to the electricity and water to build the concrete foundation. So what we have all of a sudden is not just a kind of a point of topography, but a kind of a nexus of infrastructure, no? On the mountain. And in fact, the first thing that was built was this antenna by the mobile phone provider Orange. In order to guard this antenna, it's a rather expensive construction, as you know, and this area is an area of hostility. They have invited a 24-hour guard, a man, in fact, who lived in a ship container here, who was supposed to 24 hours live and guard the antenna. He was quite scared, so he's fenced the mountain, the hilltop around him. So what we have now is a hilltop with an antenna, infrastructure, a 24-hour guard, and a fence. He felt quite lonely, so his wife and little girl and two girls went to live with him. And after some time,